The rain did not just fall, it hammered against the black umbrellas like 1,000 tiny judgments. It was a cold, grey Tuesday, the kind of day that felt less like a tragedy and more like a closing statement. Elias Thorne stood at the very edge of the crowd. He did not have an umbrella. He wore a black trench coat that was slightly too large at the shoulders and fraying at the cuffs. His hair, dark and wet, was plastered to his forehead. He did not wipe it away. He simply stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the mahogany casket being lowered into the wet earth. That casket contained Arthur Thorne, the king of time. The man who had built Thorne & Co. from a dusty repair shop into a global empire of luxury timepieces. To the world, Arthur was a visionary. To the people weeping in the front row, he was a provider. To Elias, he was a silhouette, a shadow that occasionally passed through the hallway, checking his pocket watch, always late for something more important than his eldest son. In the front row, under a canopy of silk umbrellas held by bodyguards, stood Lydia, Arthur's second wife. She wore a veil, but even through the black lace, Elias could see she was perfectly composed. She dabbled a dry handkerchief to dry eyes. Next to her was Julian, Elias's half-brother. Julian was 22, 6 years younger than Elias. He was checking his phone, hiding the screen inside the fold of his coat. He looked bored. He looked like a man waiting for a commercial break to end so the real show could begin. The priest spoke about legacy. He spoke about time. He spoke about how Arthur Thorne had mastered the seconds and minutes of life. Elias looked down at his own wrist. He wore a cheap digital watch. It was functional. It beeped on the hour. It was ugly. It was the only thing he could afford on his salary as a warehouse inventory clerk. He had never been allowed to work at the company. Arthur had forbidden it. "You have clumsy hands," Arthur had told him once, when Elias was 10. Elias had dropped the teacup. "Watchmakers need surgeons' hands. You have butcher's hands. Go find something heavy to lift." Elias looked at his hands now. They were red from the cold. The skin was rough. There were calluses on his palms and grease stains under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. But they were steady. As the casket hit the bottom of the grave with a dull thud, Elias's hands did not shake. The ceremony ended. The crowd began to disperse, moving toward the line of black limousines waiting on the gravel path. Elias turned to leave. He intended to walk to the bus stop. It was a 3-mile hike, but he didn't mind the rain. It washed things away. "Elias!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of the rain. Elias stopped. He turned around. Mr. Sterling was standing there, the old family lawyer. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of grey stone. He held a large umbrella, but he didn't offer to share it. "Mr. Sterling," Elias said, nodding respectfully. "You are expected at the manor," Sterling said. His voice was flat, professional. "The reading of the will commences in 1 hour. Your presence is mandatory." "I didn't think he would want me there," Elias said honestly. Sterling adjusted his glasses. "It is not a matter of what he wanted. It is a matter of legal procedure. Get in the third car. Do not keep us waiting." Sterling turned and walked away before Elias could argue. Elias looked at the third car. It was a sleek sedan, not a limousine. It was the car usually reserved for staff. He walked over, opened the door, and slid into the leather seat. It was warm inside. It smelled of expensive vanilla air freshener. Elias leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He tried to remember a single warm memory of his father. He tried to find a moment where they had laughed or played catch or shared a secret. He searched his mind for a long time. The only thing he found was the sound of ticking. The endless, rhythmic ticking of the hundreds of clocks that lined the walls of his father's study. That was the soundtrack of his childhood. Ticking and silence. The Thorne Manor was a beast of a house. It sat on a hill overlooking the city, a sprawling estate of stone and glass. It was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded. Elias walked through the front doors, dripping water onto the marble floor. A maid rushed over to take his coat, her nose wrinkling slightly at the smell of wet wool. "They are in the library, sir," she whispered. Elias nodded and walked down the long hallway. The walls were lined with portraits of ancestors, stern men with pocket watches. They all looked like Arthur. They all looked like they were judging Elias. He pushed open the heavy oak doors of the library. The room was warm. A fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace. The walls were covered in books that had never been read and clocks that were synchronized to the second. Lydia was sitting in a high-backed velvet chair, sipping a glass of brandy. She had removed her veil. Her makeup was flawless. She looked at Elias as if he were a mud stain on her carpet. "You're dripping," she said. "Hello, Lydia," Elias said softly. He remained standing near the door. Julian was leaning against the fireplace, tossing a silver lighter into the air and catching it. "Took you long enough?" Julian sneered. "Bus breakdown?" "I came in the car Sterling sent," Elias replied. "Whatever," Julian muttered. "Let's get this over with. I have a flight to Ibiza tonight. Some of us have lives." Mr. Sterling sat behind Arthur's massive mahogany desk. He arranged a stack of papers with agonizing precision. He waited until the grandfather clock in the corner chimed 3 times. Dong, dong, dong. "Please, sit," Sterling said. Elias pulled a simple wooden chair from the corner and sat down, far away from Lydia and Julian. Sterling cleared his throat. He picked up a thick document bound in blue velvet. "We are gathered here to execute the last will and testament of Arthur Reginald Thorne," Sterling began. "Arthur was a man of precision. His wishes are explicit. There is to be no contest. Any beneficiary who challenges the will automatically forfeits their share." Lydia swirled her brandy. "Get to the numbers, Sterling. We know the drill." Sterling ignored her. He began to read. "To my beloved wife, Lydia," Sterling read, his voice devoid of emotion. "I leave the Thorne Manor, including all its contents, art collections, and the surrounding 50 acres of land. Furthermore, I leave her the summer estate in the Hamptons and a cash sum of $50 million. Lydia didn't smile. She just nodded, as if this was the bare minimum she expected. She took a sip of her drink. "To my son, Julian," Sterling continued. Julian straightened up, catching the lighter in his fist. "I leave the majority controlling stake in Thorne & Co., representing 60% of the company's shares. I also leave him my collection of vintage sports cars, the city penthouse, and a cash sum of $30 million. Julian let out a loud whoop. Boom! There it is. He punched the air. CEO Julian Thorne. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Lydia reached out and patted Julian's arm. You deserve it, darling. You are the future. Elias sat silently. He felt a strange numbness. He hadn't expected money. He hadn't expected shares. But hearing the sheer scale of the wealth being handed over, wealth built on a legacy he respected, handed to a boy who couldn't tell the difference between a gear and a gasket, it stung. It stung deep in his chest. And finally, Sterling said. He paused. He looked up from the paper and stared directly at Elias. The room went silent. The fire crackled. Lydia smirked. "Oh, right, the spare. To my first son, Elias," Sterling read. Elias held his breath. He didn't want anything. He just wanted to know if his father had thought of him at all. Even a sentence. Even a goodbye. "I leave the contents of the small wooden box currently in Mr. Sterling's possession." Sterling reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a small, unassuming box made of dark walnut wood. It was about the size of a book. It was plain. No carvings, no gold inlays. Just a simple, scratched wooden box. Sterling stood up and walked around the desk. He approached Elias and held it out. Elias took the box. It was heavy. Much heavier than it looked. "Is that it?" Julian laughed. "A box? What's in it? His old socks?" "Open it," Lydia commanded, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. Elias placed the box on his lap. His rough fingers trembled slightly as he undid the simple brass latch. He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a cushion of faded blue velvet, lay a pocket watch. But it wasn't one of the masterpieces Thorne & Co. was famous for. It was a wreck. The silver casing was tarnished black. The glass face was cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The hands were bent. It looked like it had been run over by a truck and then buried in the mud for a decade. Underneath the watch was a folded piece of paper. Elias picked up the watch. It was cold. It felt dead. There was no ticking, no heartbeat. He ran his thumb over the cracked glass. "A piece of junk," Julian scoffed. "Classic Dad. One last joke from the grave." Elias unfolded the note. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, angular, rushed. "Elias, you always liked to tinker with things you didn't understand. You have butcher's hands, but you have a stubborn head. This was my first project. It never worked. I couldn't fix it. The best watchmakers in Europe couldn't fix it. It is a failure. Fix it or throw it away. I don't care. It's yours now. Arthur." Elias read the note twice. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. His father had left him a broken machine that he, the great Arthur Thorne, had admitted was unfixable. It wasn't a gift. It was a taunt. It was a reminder that Elias was lesser. That Elias was the one who got the scraps. "Well," Lydia asked, craning her neck, "what does it say?" Elias folded the note and put it in his pocket. "He wants me to fix it," he said quietly. Lydia burst out laughing. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Fix it? You? Oh, that is rich. Arthur really did have a sense of humor. He left the empire to the son with the vision and the trash to the son with the dirty hands." Julian walked over and looked down at the rusted watch in Elias's hands. He sneered. "Tell you what, bro, I'm feeling generous. Since I'm the new boss, I'll let you keep that. I won't even charge you for taking company property." "It's not company property," Sterling interjected calmly. "It is a personal effect. It is his." "Whatever," Julian waved his hand. "Class dismissed? I have a plane to catch." "There is one more thing," Sterling said. He looked at Elias. "The will stipulates that the transfer of assets is immediate. However, regarding residence..." Lydia stood up. She smoothed her dress. "There is no need to be technical, Sterling. This is my house now." She turned her cold blue eyes onto Elias. "Elias," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream. "You have never belonged here. You were a reminder of a past Arthur wanted to forget. Now that he is gone, I want the memory gone too." She pointed to the door. "Get out." Elias looked at her. He looked at Julian, who was already texting again. He looked at the luxurious room, the fire, the books. This was the home he had grown up in, even if he had lived in the shadows. "It is raining," Elias said. "Then you better start walking," Lydia replied. "You have 1 hour to pack your things from the guest quarters. If you are not off the property by 5 o'clock, security will escort you." Elias looked at the broken watch in his hand. He closed his fingers around it. The metal dug into his palm. It hurt, but the pain was grounding. It was real. He stood up. He didn't look at Lydia. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at Mr. Sterling. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Elias said. Sterling's expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. A flicker of pity, or perhaps respect. It was gone before Elias could be sure. "Good luck, Elias." Elias turned and walked out of the library. He didn't slam the door. He closed it gently until the latch clicked. He walked up the back stairs to the small room he had occupied since he was a child. It wasn't much. A bed, a desk, a small toolbox. He grabbed his duffel bag. He didn't have many clothes. A few shirts, his work trousers, a spare pair of boots. He packed them efficiently. Then he went to his desk. He opened the drawer and took out his tools. Screwdrivers the size of needles, tweezers, a magnifying loupe. He wrapped them carefully in a leather roll. These were his true possessions. He put the wooden box with the broken watch into the bag, wrapping it in a sweater to protect it. Not because it was valuable, but because it was a puzzle. And Elias Thorne never walked away from a puzzle. He zipped up the bag. He looked around the room one last time. The walls were bare. There were no photos. It was as if no one had ever lived there. "Goodbye," he whispered to the empty air. He walked back down the stairs, bypassing the main hall, and exited through the kitchen door. The staff watched him go in silence. The cook, a kind woman named Mrs. Higgins, looked like she wanted to say something, but she kept her head down, chopping vegetables. She knew better than to cross Lydia. Elias stepped out into the rain. It was pouring harder now. The sky was a bruised purple. The wind howled through the manicured gardens. He walked down the long, winding driveway. The gravel crunched under his boots. He didn't look back at the mansion. He didn't look back at the lighted windows where his family was likely toasting to their fortune. He reached the massive iron gates. They were closed. He pushed the pedestrian exit open and stepped onto the public road. The heavy metal gate clanged shut behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Elias was alone. He had no money. He had no home. He had a bag of clothes and a broken watch that his father had used to mock him from beyond the grave. He began to walk. The water soaked through his coat, chilling him to the bone. But as he walked, his thumb brushed against the outline of the watch in his bag. "Fix it or throw it away." "I'm not throwing it away," Elias muttered to the rain. "I'm going to make it run. And when I do, I'll know something you didn't, old man." He didn't know where he was going, but he kept moving. One foot in front of the other. Tick, tock. The city lights shimmered in the distance, a blur of gold and neon. Somewhere down there, in the belly of the city, there was a basement he could rent. There was work to be done. Elias Thorne had nothing, and because he had nothing left to lose. The rain washed over him, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of the mansion pressing down on his shoulders. He felt light. He felt cold, yes, but he felt free. He clutched the strap of his bag tighter and disappeared into the storm. The bus ride down from the heights of Thorne Manor to the industrial district took 40 minutes. In that time, the scenery changed from wrought iron gates and manicured hedges to chain-link fences and cracked pavement. The air grew thicker, tasting of diesel and damp concrete. Elias stepped off the bus at the corner of 4th and Ash. This was the Iron District. It was a place where things were made, or where things went to rust. It was the perfect place to disappear. He found a rental listing taped to the window of a laundromat. Basement unit, cheap, cash only. The landlady was a woman named Mrs. Gable, who looked like she was made of dried tobacco leaves and suspicion. She didn't ask for his name. She didn't ask for references. She just looked at the cash in his hand, the last of his savings from his previous job, and handed him a key that felt greasy to the touch. "Don't make noise," she croaked, "and don't expect the heat to work past 10. The apartment was essentially a concrete box underground. It had a single window, a narrow slit high up on the wall that looked out onto the sidewalk. Through the grime-coated glass, Elias could only see the shoes of people walking by. Boots, sneakers, heels. A parade of feet going places he wasn't. The room smelled of mildew and old copper. There was a rusted sink in the corner, a mattress on the floor that sagged in the middle, and a sturdy wooden table left by a previous tenant. Elias dropped his bag on the mattress. He didn't unpack his clothes. He unpacked his tools. He set up the wooden table directly under the single hanging light bulb. He laid out his leather roll of instruments, the tweezers, the screwdrivers, the loop. He arranged them with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a heart transplant. Then he took out the wooden box. He placed the broken pocket watch in the center of the table. In the harsh yellow light of the bulb, it looked even worse than it had in the library. The silver was pitted. The face was a disaster. Elias sat down on a milk crate he found in the corner. He stared at the watch. "Just you and me now," he whispered. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Above him, on the street level, rain boots splashed through puddles. But down here, there was silence. The first night, he didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just sat there, turning the watch over and over in his hands. He was trying to listen to it. His father had taught him that every machine had a voice, even broken ones, especially broken ones. They whispered where they hurt. But this watch was mute. It was a cold, dead wait. The next morning, reality set in. Elias needed money. He couldn't eat pride, and he couldn't pay rent with a broken heirloom. He walked 3 blocks to the immense distribution center of global logistics. It was a warehouse the size of a cathedral, filled with endless rows of cardboard boxes. They were hiring. They were always hiring. They didn't care about his last name. They only cared if he could lift 50 pounds repeatedly for 10 hours. The foreman was a man with a neck as thick as a tree stump. He looked at Elias's hands. "Soft," the foreman grunted. "You won't last a week." "Try me," Elias said. He got the job. Minimum wage. No benefits. The shift started at 6 in the morning and ended at 4 in the afternoon. For the next few weeks, Elias's life became a grueling rhythm of physical exhaustion. He spent 10 hours a day lifting heavy crates, stacking pallets, and loading trucks. His back screamed, his muscles burned, his hands, once relatively smooth, began to harden. Blisters formed, burst, and turned into calluses. He earned the butcher's hands his father had always accused him of having. But at 4:30 p.m., the transformation happened. Elias would walk back to his basement. He would scrub his hands with industrial soap until the skin was raw, removing every trace of warehouse grease. He would drink a cup of instant coffee. And then he would sit at the wooden table. He would put on his magnifying loupe. The world would shrink down to a circle of light. Under the magnification, the watch was a landscape of ruin. Elias began the process of dismantling it. It was slow, agonizing work. The screws were rusted shut. One wrong move, and he would strip the threads, rendering the watch forever sealed. He applied tiny drops of penetrating oil, waiting hours for it to seep in. He held his breath, turning the screwdriver with microscopic movements. Click, click, a fraction of a millimeter at a time. When he finally got the back casing off, he gasped. He had expected to see a standard movement, maybe a Swiss lever escapement, something traditional. What he saw was chaos. The interior of the watch was crammed with gears, too many gears. They were layered on top of each other in a way that made no mechanical sense. Some wheels had teeth that didn't mesh with anything. There were springs that seemed to pull in opposite directions. It looked like a machine designed by a madman. "What were you trying to do, Arthur?" Elias murmured, staring into the metallic abyss. It wasn't just broken, it was sabotaged. It looked as if his father had deliberately built a paradox, a machine that physically could not turn. Elias spent a month just mapping the layout. He drew diagrams on the back of used flyers he found in the trash. He labeled every gear, every pivot. He tried to find the logic. There had to be logic. Arthur Thorne didn't make mistakes. He made calculations. As the months dragged on, winter turned to spring. The basement remained cold. Elias lived on instant noodles and stale bread. He grew thin. His cheekbones became sharper, his eyes darker. He stopped talking to people. At the warehouse, he was a ghost. He clocked in, did his work, and clocked out. He had no friends. He wanted no friends. Sometimes, during his lunch break, he would see a discarded newspaper in the break room. Thorne & Co. shares tumble as new CEO announces restructuring. There was a picture of Julian. He was wearing a white suit, holding a champagne glass on a yacht. He looked swollen with arrogance. Next to him was Lydia, looking icy and regal. The article described how Julian was modernizing the brand. He was firing the old master craftsmen. He was outsourcing production to cheaper factories. He was focusing on smart technology and digital integration. Elias read it, and he felt a dull ache in his chest. They were dismantling the soul of the company. They were turning art into commerce. But he couldn't do anything. He was just a warehouse worker living underground. One evening, deep in June, Elias hit a wall. He had been working on the mainspring barrel of the watch for 3 weeks. It was jammed. No matter what he did, it wouldn't release. He was tired. His eyes were stinging from the strain of the loop. His hands were shaking from low blood sugar. He pushed the screwdriver a little too hard. Skirt! The screwdriver slipped. It gouged a scratch across the brass plate of the movement. Elias froze. He stared at the fresh scratch. It was a wound. He had hurt it. A wave of rage, hot and sudden, rose up in his throat. He stood up and threw the screwdriver across the room. It hit the concrete wall with a clang. "It's impossible!" he shouted. The sound of his own voice startled him. It was hoarse, unused. "It's a joke! It's just a damn joke!" He grabbed the watch. He wanted to smash it. He wanted to hurl it against the wall and watch the gears scatter like confetti. He wanted to be free of his father's last riddle. He raised his hand. Then he stopped. He looked at the watch in his fist. He felt the weight of it. If he smashed it, he proved them right. If he smashed it, he was just the clumsy son with the butcher's hands. If he smashed it, Lydia won. Elias lowered his hand. He took a deep breath. He sat back down. He picked up the watch and placed it gently back on the velvet pad. He walked over to the corner, picked up the screwdriver, and wiped it clean. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the machine. He didn't touch the watch again that night. He just sat there and watched it. And as he watched, in the periphery of his vision, he saw something. It was the scratch he had just made. Under the harsh light, the scratch revealed something underneath the brass plating. It wasn't brass all the way through. There was a glint of something else, something darker. Gunmetal? Elias leaned in. He picked up the loop. He looked at the scratch again. It wasn't just a scratch. The slip of the screwdriver had dislodged a microscopic speck of grime that had been hiding a seam. It wasn't a solid plate. It was a false bottom, a cover. Elias's heart began to hammer against his ribs. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a disguise. The chaotic gears on top, the ones that made no sense, they were a decoy. They were a facade meant to look like a broken mess to discourage anyone from looking deeper. Arthur hadn't built a broken watch. He had built a safe. And Elias had almost destroyed it because he was impatient. A slow smile spread across Elias's face. It was the first time he had smiled in 6 months. "You old fox," Elias whispered. "You hid it. You hid the real mechanism." But how to open the false bottom? There were no latches, no screws. Elias looked at the mess of decoy gears again. They weren't random. They were a combination lock. He had to align the broken gears in a specific, non-logical pattern to release the catch. It was a puzzle of immense complexity. He had to ignore the laws of mechanics and follow the logic of a man who wanted to protect a secret. Elias picked up his tweezers. The fatigue vanished. The hunger vanished. He began to work again. Summer bled into autumn. The basement got colder. But Elias didn't notice. He bought a small electric heater with his warehouse wages. He bought better tools. He started eating vegetables again because he needed his brain to be sharp. He developed a routine: work, home, the watch, sleep, repeat. He was getting closer. He could feel it in the tension of the springs. He had figured out the sequence for 3 of the 5 decoy gears. When he aligned them correctly, he heard a tiny, almost inaudible click. It was the sound of success. But the world outside was crumbling. One day in November, Elias walked past an electronics store window. The TVs were broadcasting a news report. Thorne & Co. faces bankruptcy rumors. The reporter stood in front of the flagship store. The windows were boarded up. Following the disastrous launch of the Smart Thorne series, which was plagued by battery fires and software glitches, the company's stock has hit an all-time low. Shareholders are calling for the resignation of Julian Thorne. Elias watched the screen. Julian was shown getting into a car, shielding his face from paparazzi. He looked haggard. He looked like a scared child playing dress-up in his father's suit. Elias felt a strange lack of satisfaction. He didn't feel happy about their failure. He just felt sad. That company was his grandfather's life, his father's life. It was being burned to the ground by incompetence. A man standing next to Elias on the sidewalk spat on the ground. "Rich idiots," the man muttered. "Run it into the ground and still walk away with millions." Not this time, Elias thought. Arthur wouldn't let them walk away with everything. He hurried back to his basement. The urgency was growing. If the company went under, whatever was inside this watch might be the only thing left of the legacy. He reached his door. He unlocked it and stepped into the gloom. He froze. The air in the room was different. It smelled of cologne. Expensive cedarwood cologne. Elias's eyes darted to the corner. Sitting on his milk crate, in the shadows, was a figure. Elias reached for the heavy wrench on his table, his muscles tensing for a fight. "Calm down, Elias," a voice said. The figure leaned forward into the light. It was Mr. Sterling. The lawyer looked older. His grey suit was immaculate, but his face was lined with new wrinkles. He looked tired. "How did you get in here?" Elias asked, not lowering the wrench. "I have keys to many doors," Sterling said calmly. "And your landlady is easily bribed with a bottle of gin." Sterling looked around the damp, miserable room. He looked at the peeling wallpaper. He looked at the single mattress. Finally, his eyes landed on the work table. The watch was there, disassembled. The decoy gears were laid out in a specific pattern. Sterling's eyes widened slightly. He stood up and walked over to the table. He stared at the watch. "You found the decoy," Sterling said softly. It wasn't a question. "I found it," Elias said. "Why are you here, Sterling? Did Lydia send you to kick me out of the city too?" Sterling turned to face him. "Lydia doesn't know where you are. She thinks you're dead. Or in prison. She stopped caring the moment the gate closed." "Then why?" "Because today is the 1-year anniversary of your father's death," Sterling said. Elias blinked. He had lost track of the dates. 1 year. He had been in this hole for a year? Sterling reached into his pocket. He pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your father gave me specific instructions," Sterling said. "He told me to wait exactly 1 year. If, after 1 year, you had sold the watch, I was to leave you alone forever." Elias tightened his grip on the wrench. "And if I hadn't?" "If you still had it," Sterling continued, "I was to come and check on its condition." Sterling looked back at the table, at the intricate, maddening puzzle that Elias was halfway through solving. "He didn't think you would solve it," Sterling admitted. "He thought you would just keep it as a memento. But you are actually fixing it." "I'm a watchmaker," Elias said. "It's what I do." Sterling nodded slowly. "Yes, it seems you are." He placed the envelope on the table next to the watch. "This is for you, but I cannot give you the second part of the message until the watch is running." "Is it running, Elias?" Elias looked at the watch. "Not yet. I need more time. The final sequence. I'm close, but I'm missing a variable." Sterling checked his own watch, a pristine Patek Philippe. "You have until midnight," Sterling said. "The terms of the trust expire at 12 a.m. tonight. If the watch is not functioning by then, the contents of the Plan B protocol remain sealed forever." Midnight? Elias looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8 p.m. "That's 4 hours. It's impossible." "You have butcher's hands, remember?" Sterling said, his voice echoing Arthur's cruelty. "Prove him wrong." Sterling sat back down on the milk crate. He crossed his legs. He folded his hands. He became a statue. "I will wait." Elias stared at him. Then he looked at the watch. 4 hours. 4 hours to solve a riddle that had stumped him for a year. He felt a surge of adrenaline. It was fear, yes, but it was also focus. The kind of hyper-focus that made the rest of the world disappear. Elias sat down. He didn't look at Sterling. He didn't look at the damp walls. He put the loop to his eye. "Create order from chaos," Elias whispered to himself. He picked up the tweezers. His hand was steady as a rock. The final test had begun. Time is usually a concept, an abstract measurement of decay. But in that basement, time became a physical enemy. It was a predator circling the room, getting closer with every sweep of the second hand on the wall clock. Tick, tock. 9 o'clock passed, then 10. Elias was sweating, despite the damp chill of the room. Drops of perspiration rolled down his forehead, stinging his eyes. But he didn't blink. He couldn't blink. Under the magnifying loop, the world was a canyon of brass and steel. Sterling sat on the milk crate in the shadows, silent as a tombstone. He didn't check his phone. He didn't shift his weight. He simply watched, his eyes reflecting the dull yellow light of the hanging bulb. Elias was stuck. The decoy gears were aligned. He had solved the outer layer of the puzzle. But the inner mechanism, the heart of the watch, refused to beat. There was a final lock, a single pin that needed to slide into place to engage the mainspring. But it wouldn't move. Elias tried to gently nudge it with his finest needle. Nothing. He tried to rotate the crown. It spun freely, engaging nothing. 1 hour, Sterling said. His voice was not loud, but it hit Elias like a physical blow. Elias put down his tools. He took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of oil and old concrete. He closed his eyes. "Think," he told himself. "Think like him." Arthur Thorne was a man of logic, but he was also a man of ego. He had called Elias a butcher. He had said Elias had clumsy hands. Why give a delicate puzzle to a butcher, unless the puzzle wasn't delicate? Elias opened his eyes and looked at the watch again. He looked at the inscription on the inside of the case. It was tiny, barely visible even with the loop. Tempus fugit. Time flies. A standard Latin phrase. Arthur used it on all his clocks. But on this watch, the engraving was upside down relative to the 12 o'clock marker. Upside down. Elias frowned. Arthur didn't make mistakes. If it was upside down, it was an instruction. Elias picked up the watch. Instead of holding it gently, flat on the table as a watchmaker should, he turned it over. He held it upside down. Gravity. The tiny pin that was stuck. Maybe it wasn't stuck. Maybe it was a gravity latch, a mechanism designed to only release when the world was inverted. It was a test of perspective. You had to stop looking at the problem the way everyone else did. You had to turn it on its head. Elias held the watch upside down. He inserted the winding key. He turned it counterclockwise, the wrong direction for any normal watch. Click! The sound was sharp, a tiny metallic snap that echoed in the silence. Sterling sat up straighter. Elias felt a vibration in his fingertips, a tremor. He turned the key again. Click, click, click. The resistance was there now. The spring was coiling. The tension was building. He stopped winding. He held his breath. For 3 seconds, there was silence. And then, tick, 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 tick. The sound was weak at first, like a heart starting after a long rest. But then it grew stronger. Tick, tock, tick, tock. A steady, rhythmic, beautiful heartbeat. The second hand on the cracked face began to sweep. It moved with a smoothness that defied the rusted appearance of the casing. Elias slumped back in his chair. The tension left his body so suddenly he almost fell over. He stared at the machine in his hands. It was alive. 11:52 p.m., Sterling said. He stood up. He walked into the light. He looked down at the watch in Elias's hands. A rare, genuine smile touched the old lawyer's lips. "He said you wouldn't do it," Sterling said softly. "He bet me a bottle of 1920 scotch that you would sell it for parts within a month. I am pleased to win that bet." Elias didn't smile. He felt exhausted. "What is it, Sterling?" "It's just a watch. A complicated, annoying watch." "What does it do?" "It doesn't just tell time, Elias," Sterling said. "It keeps time." Sterling reached for the envelope he had placed on the table earlier. He ripped it open. Inside was a single key card. It was black, with no markings, just a magnetic strip. "The watch is a two-part authentication device," Sterling explained. "The acoustic signature of that specific movement, the exact frequency of its ticking, is the password to the Thorne Family Trust's emergency vault. The keycard is the physical access." Elias looked at the ticking watch. An acoustic password? That technology, that's decades ahead of what he was making. "Your father was many things," Sterling said, "but he was never behind the times. He was waiting for the right time." Sterling checked his own watch. "Midnight is approaching. The probationary period is over. You are now the legal executor of the Plan B protocol." "Plan B?" Elias asked. "What is Plan B?" "Saving the company," Sterling said grimly, "or burying it. That will be your choice." Sterling gestured to the door. "Come, my car is outside." "Now?" Elias looked at his dirty clothes, his grime-stained hands. "I can't go anywhere. I look like a vagrant." "There is no time for vanity," Sterling replied. "And frankly, Elias, you look more like a Thorne right now than your brother ever has in his bespoke suits. You look like a man who works." Elias stood up. He grabbed his coat. He put the ticking watch into his breast pocket right over his heart. He could feel it beating against his ribs. He looked around the basement one last time. The milk crate, the rusted sink, the darkness. This had been his purgatory. Now he was walking out. He followed Sterling up the narrow concrete stairs, out into the cool night air. A black sedan was waiting at the curb. Not the staff car this time. This was the flagship limousine. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Elias hesitated. "Where are we going?" "To the manor," Sterling said. "The wolves are hungry, Elias, and they have run out of meat. It is time to feed them some reality." Elias slid into the car. The door closed, sealing him in silence and leather. As the car pulled away, leaving the iron district behind, Elias touched the pocket watch. Tick, tock. He wasn't the same boy who had been kicked out into the rain a year ago. That boy was broken. This man was fixed. The drive back to the Heights was surreal. Elias watched the city lights blur past. He saw the billboards for Thorne and Company. Some were torn, some were flickering. The empire was dying. They turned onto the private road leading to the estate. The gates, which had been slammed in his face a year ago, swung open automatically as the car approached. The manor loomed ahead, dark and imposing against the night sky. But unlike the funeral day, the house wasn't asleep. Lights were blazing in the library. There were other cars in the driveway, police cruisers. "Police?" Elias asked, leaning forward. I took the liberty of inviting some observers, Sterling said cryptically. Things might get volatile. The car stopped. Elias stepped out. The air up here was cleaner, thinner. Sterling led the way. They didn't go to the servants' entrance. They walked straight to the massive double doors. Sterling pushed them open. The main hall was chaotic. Lydia was there, wearing a silk dressing gown, her hair disheveled. She was screaming at a police officer.
Julian was there, slumped on the stairs, his head in his hands. He looked sick.
"You can't seize the assets," Lydia was shrieking. "This is a misunderstanding. My lawyers will destroy you." "Ma'am, the bank has foreclosed," the officer said patiently. "You have 24 hours to vacate." "Vacate?" Lydia laughed hysterically. "This is my house. I'm a Thorne." Actually, a voice cut through the noise. The room went silent. Everyone turned. Sterling stood in the doorway, tall and impassive. And next to him stood Elias. Lydia's eyes went wide. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "You," she breathed. Her shock turned instantly to venom. "What is he doing here? Did he come to beg for scraps? Get him out! Officer, arrest this trespasser!" Julian looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Elias?" he mumbled. "You're alive?" "I am," Elias said calmly. He stepped into the light of the chandelier. His trench coat was old. His boots were muddy. But he held his head high. "Mr. Elias Thorne is not trespassing," Sterling announced, his voice booming off the marble walls. "He is here to activate the final clause of Arthur Thorne's will." "The will is settled," Lydia snapped. "We got everything. He got a box of trash." "The will had a condition," Sterling corrected. "A condition regarding the competency of the heirs. If the company's value dropped below a certain threshold within 1 year, the primary assets would be frozen and the Plan B trust would be activated." Sterling paused for effect. "However, the trust can only be accessed by the bearer of the key." Lydia froze. She looked at Sterling, then at Elias. "The key?" she whispered. Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out the watch. In the silence of the large hall, the sound was amplified. Tick, tock. Tick, tock. It was a strong, mechanical heartbeat. Julian stared at it. "The junk watch," he whispered. "You fixed it?" "It wasn't junk," Elias said. He looked at his stepmother. "It was a test, and you both failed." Lydia's face went pale, then red. She marched towards him. "Give it to me. That belongs to the family." She reached out to snatch the watch. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He simply caught her wrist. His hand, his rough, calloused, strong hand, held her delicate wrist firmly. "I am the family," Elias said. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a year of silence. "You are just the people who lived in his house." He let go of her hand. She stumbled back, rubbing her wrist, looking at him with fear for the first time. "Mr. Sterling," Elias said, turning to the lawyer. "What is the status of the company?" "Critical," Sterling replied. "Insolvency is imminent within 48 hours unless capital is injected." "And the trust?" "Contains the patents for the Kronos movement," Sterling said, "and enough liquid capital to clear the immediate debts, but it requires the code." Elias looked at the watch. He looked at Julian, who was looking at him with a mixture of jealousy and desperate hope. He looked at Lydia, who was seething with impotent rage. He had the power to save them, or to let them burn. "Open it," Elias said. Sterling nodded. He placed a briefcase on the hall table. He opened it to reveal a secure terminal. Place the watch on the sensor. Elias walked over. He placed the ticking watch on the black glass pad. The computer beeped, analyzing audio signature. A green bar loaded on the screen. Match confirmed. Access granted. The screen flashed. A video file opened. It was Arthur. He was sitting in his study looking directly at the camera. He looked healthy, younger than when he died. If you are watching this, Arthur's voice filled the hall. It means the company is in ruins. I expected this. Julian, you never had the discipline. Lydia, you never had the soul. Lydia gasped. But, Arthur continued, if this video is playing, it also means someone fixed my watch. And I know who that is. The video, Arthur smiled. It was a sad, proud smile. Hello, Elias. I'm sorry I was hard on you. I had to be. Diamonds are only formed under pressure. And you, my son, are the hardest diamond of them all. Elias felt a lump in his throat. He blinked back tears. The company is yours, Elias, Arthur said. Rebuild it. Do it your way, with your hands. The screen went black. Then a list of documents appeared. Transfer of ownership. The room was deadly silent. Elias looked at the screen. He looked at his hands. They were trembling, just slightly. He turned to Lydia and Julian. Pack your bags, Elias said quietly. You can't be serious, Julian stammered. Elias, we're brothers. You can't kick us out. I'm not kicking you out, Elias said. The bank is. This house is gone. The assets are gone. He picked up the watch and put it back in his pocket. But the factory remains, Elias said. And that is where I'm going. If you want a job, Julian, you can come. We need people to sweep the floors. He turned to the door. Elias! Lydia screamed. You bastard! Elias stopped. He didn't turn around. No, Lydia, he said. I'm just the watchmaker. He walked out the door into the night. Sterling followed him. Behind him, the wailing of his stepmother faded into the distance. Ahead of him, the city lights twinkled. The first act was over. The rust had been scrubbed away. Now, the real work and the real war was about to begin. The Thorne & Co. factory was not a building. It was a corpse. Located in the industrial outskirts, far from the polished glass of the city center, the brick structure loomed grey and silent against the morning mist. The windows were grime-streaked. The once proud brass sign over the gate, Thorne, master watchmaker since 1920, was hanging by a single rusted bolt. It swung in the wind with a mournful screech. Screech! Clang! Screech! Clang! Elias stood at the gates. It was 6 a.m. The air was biting cold. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing his work boots, dark jeans, and a thick flannel shirt under his old trench coat. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man looking for a day labor shift. Beside him, Mr. Sterling shivered in his cashmere coat. The lawyer looked out of place here, like a penguin in a desert. The unions are ready to riot, Sterling said, clutching his briefcase. Production has been stalled for 3 months. The electricity was scheduled to be cut off yesterday, but the transfer from the trust cleared just in time to keep the lights on. For now. For now, Elias repeated. He looked at the crowd gathering near the employee entrance. There were about 50 of them. Men and women with tired faces and angry eyes. They held signs. Pay us! Thorne equals thieves! No pension, no peace! These were the people Julian had forgotten. These were the hands that actually built the empire. "Stay here, Sterling," Elias said. "Sir?" Sterling blinked. "You cannot go in there alone. They are volatile. They threw a wrench at the last manager." "I'm not a manager," Elias said. He pushed open the pedestrian gate and walked into the courtyard. The chatter of the crowd died down as they saw him approach. Then, a murmur of confusion rippled through them. They didn't recognize him. They were expecting Julian, the boy in the silk suits. They saw a man with messy hair and scars on his hands. A large man in a grease-stained jumpsuit stepped forward. His name was Vance. He was the foreman. Elias recognized him from photos in the company archives, though Vance looked 10 years older than his age. "Who are you?" Vance barked. "We don't want scabs here. Turn around." Elias didn't stop. He walked until he was 3 feet from Vance. "I'm Elias Thorne," he said. The name hit the crowd like a stone dropped in a pond. "Thorne?" Vance spat on the ground, missing Elias's boot by an inch. "Another one. What, did the pretty boy send his ugly cousin to fire us in person?" The crowd jeered. Someone shouted, "Where's our pension, Thorne?" Elias raised his hands. Not in surrender, but in a gesture of calm. "I'm not here to fire you," Elias said. His voice was steady, projecting well without shouting. "And I'm not here to promise you miracles. The money is gone. Julian spent it. The banks took the rest." "Then why are you here?" a woman shouted. "To mock us?" "To work," Elias said. He unbuttoned his trench coat and tossed it onto a nearby crate. Then he rolled up the sleeves of his flannel shirt. He pointed to the loading bay door, which was jammed halfway open. A forklift sat dead in the entrance, blocking everything. Smoke was rising from its engine block. 2 mechanics were standing around it, arguing. "That lift has been broken for 2 days," Elias said, looking at Vance. "Hydraulic seal on the main piston?" Vance narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, so?" "So you can't move the inventory out if the bay is blocked. If you don't move inventory, you don't invoice. If you don't invoice, nobody gets paid." Elias walked past Vance. The crowd parted, confused. He walked straight to the forklift. He didn't ask for permission. He knelt down in the oil-stained mud. He reached into the engine compartment. "He's gonna burn his hand," one of the mechanics whispered. Elias didn't burn his hand. He found the pressure release valve. It was stuck. He didn't use a wrench. He used the heel of his palm, striking it at a precise angle. Thwack! Hiss! Steam escaped. The pressure normalized. Elias reached in, twisted the bypass line, and reconnected the coupling that had vibrated loose. He stood up, wiping grease onto his jeans. "Try it now," Elias said to the driver. The driver looked at Vance. Vance nodded slowly. The driver turned the key. The engine roared to life. The forks lifted smoothly. The crowd was silent. They looked at Elias's hands. They were black with oil. Elias turned back to Vance. "My father was a genius," Elias said to the group. "But he forgot how to get his hands dirty. My brother never knew how." He looked around at the faces. "I'm not them. I am a mechanic. I'm a watchmaker. And as of this morning, I'm the owner of this mess." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. "The emergency trust has released funds. It's enough to pay everyone's back wages for the last 3 months. A gasp went through the crowd. Hope, fragile and sharp, appeared in their eyes. "But," Elias raised his voice, cutting off the cheers before they could start. "That's it. That's all the cash we have. We have enough money to keep the lights on for 6 months. After that, if we haven't earned a profit, the company dies. And this time, it stays dead. He stepped closer to Vance. I can design the watches. I can fix the machines. But I can't build 10,000 units alone. I need you. Vance looked at Elias. He looked at the grease on Elias's shirt. He looked at the determination in Elias's eyes. You paid the back wages? Vance asked gruffly. The transfers are being processed by Mr. Sterling right now, Elias said. Check your accounts in an hour. Vance hesitated. Then he nodded. A short, sharp jerk of the chin. All right, Vance shouted to the crowd. You heard the man. Money hits the bank in an hour. Until then, the line starts moving. Let's go. The crowd dispersed, moving back into the factory with a renewed energy. It wasn't joy, it was relief. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Sterling walked up to him, stepping carefully over a puddle. That was theatrical, Sterling noted. Effective, but risky. You do realize the trust fund is nearly depleted after that payroll run? You have left virtually zero operating capital for marketing. We don't need marketing yet, Elias said, wiping his hands on a rag. We need a product that actually works. Julian's smartwatches are exploding on people's wrists. We need to recall them all. A recall? Sterling paled. That will cost millions. It costs more to lose our reputation, Elias said. We are going back to basics, Sterling. Mechanical, analog, eternal. No batteries, no screens. The market says analog is dead, Sterling argued. The market is wrong, Elias said. People are tired of charging their lives. They want something that beats on its own. By midday, Elias had set up his office. Not in the executive suite on the top floor. He had ordered that room to be sealed off. He set up a desk right on the factory floor, inside a glass-walled cubicle that used to be for the shift supervisor. He wanted to see the line. He wanted to hear the machines. He was deep in the blueprints of the Kronos movement, the design he had unlocked from the trust, when a commotion at the front security desk caught his attention. I am the vice president. Do not touch me. The voice was shrill, familiar. Elias looked up. Through the glass, he saw Lydia and Julian being blocked by two burly security guards. Lydia was wearing a fur coat that had seen better days. Julian was dragging two Louis Vuitton suitcases. They looked exhausted. They looked desperate. Elias sighed. He put down his pen. He walked out of the cubicle and approached the entrance. Let them in, Elias told the guards. The guards stepped back. Lydia rushed forward, her heels clicking frantically on the concrete floor. Elias, she exclaimed, putting on a grotesque mask of affection. Oh, thank God! These brutes wouldn't let us in. Can you believe it? Treating the owners like criminals. Former owners, Elias corrected gently. Details, Lydia waved her hand. Elias, darling, it has been a nightmare. The bank, they came at dawn. They changed the locks. They took the cars. We had to take a taxi here. She said the word taxi as if it were a disease. Julian stood behind her. He didn't look at Elias. He was staring at the factory floor, at the workers who were glaring at him. What do you want, Lydia? Elias asked. We need a place to stay, Lydia said. Just for a few days, until the lawyers sort out this misunderstanding with the will. We figured the executive suite here has a shower and a couch. It will have to do. No, Elias said. Lydia froze. Excuse me? The executive suite is closed, and this is a place of business. It is not a hotel. Where are we supposed to go? Julian spoke up, His voice was cracked. "Our cards are frozen. We have no cash. We have nothing." Elias looked at his brother. He saw the fear. For the first time, Julian wasn't the golden boy. He was just a 22-year-old kid who had never been taught how to survive. "I told you last night," Elias said. "I can offer you a job." Lydia let out a screech of laughter. "A job? Don't be ridiculous. Julian is a CEO. I am a socialite. We don't work." "Then you starve," Elias said. Simple, cold, true. He turned to walk away. "Wait!" Julian dropped the suitcases. "Julian!" Lydia hissed. "Don't you dare dignify him." "Shut up, mother!" Julian shouted. The factory went silent. Lydia looked shocked. Julian had never raised his voice at her. Julian stepped over the barrier. He walked up to Elias. He looked at Elias's dirty clothes. He looked at the respect the workers were giving Elias. A respect Julian had never earned. I can't sweep floors, Elias," Julian whispered. "I don't know how." "Then learn," Elias said. "Vance needs someone to clear the metal shavings from under the lathes. It's dangerous. It's dirty. It pays minimum wage. Do you want it?" Julian looked at his hands. They were manicured, soft. "Do I get a paycheck?" Julian asked. "Every Friday," Elias said. "If you show up. If you're late, you're fired." Julian swallowed hard. He nodded. "I'll take it." "Julian!" Lydia gasped. "Have you lost your mind?" "I'm hungry, Mother," Julian said flatly. "And I'm tired of running." Elias nodded to Vance, who was watching from a distance. "Vance, get him a jumpsuit and a broom." Vance grinned. It was a wolfish grin. "With pleasure, boss." Elias turned to Lydia. "And you?" he asked. Lydia drew herself up. She wrapped her fur coat tighter. "I would rather die than scrub floors for you." "That is your choice," Elias said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. He held it out. "For the bus," he said. Lydia stared at the money. Her face contorted with humiliation. She snatched the bill from his hand, her nails scratching his palm. "You will regret this," she hissed. "I will find a way. This isn't over." She turned and stormed out into the rain. Elias watched her go. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a heavy sadness. She was a woman who would rather freeze in her pride than be warm in humility. He looked at Julian. The boy was struggling to put on a blue jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. Vance was yelling at him to hurry up. Action over words, Elias thought. The weeks that followed were a blur of noise and metal. Elias practically lived at the factory. He slept on a cot in his glass cubicle. He ate sandwiches from the vending machine. He was redesigning the entire production line. The Chronos movement was brilliant, but it was complex. It required tighter tolerances than their current machines could handle. He had to recalibrate every single lathe, every single CNC machine by hand. He was exhausted. But the biggest problem wasn't the machines. It was the market. Sterling came into his office one rainy Tuesday evening. He placed a tablet on Elias's desk. "We have a problem," Sterling said. "We have many problems," Elias muttered, squinting at a gear diagram. "Which one is this?" "The supplier," Sterling said. "The Swiss supplier for our escapement springs, the hair springs. They just cancelled our contract." Elias looked up. "What? Why? We paid them." "They didn't give a reason," Sterling said, "but I made some calls. It seems they have signed an exclusivity deal with a new partner, a conglomerate called Apex Corp. Apex? Elias frowned. I've never heard of them. They are new, Sterling said. Aggressive. They have been buying up luxury brands all over Europe. And there is a rumor. What rumor? That Lydia has been seen dining with the CEO of Apex, Sterling said. Elias sat back in his chair. The room felt suddenly colder. She's selling us out, Elias realized. She knows the supply chain. She knows our weak points. Without those hairsprings, Sterling said, we cannot build the Chronos. We are dead in the water. We can't make them here? Not with this equipment, Sterling shook his head. Hairsprings require a specific alloy and a tempering process we don't have. It takes years to develop. Elias stood up and paced the small office. The Chronos was the only hope. Without it, they had nothing but Julian's exploding smartwatches. He looked out at the factory floor. It was dark now, the shift over. Only the security lights were on. In the distance, he saw a lone figure sweeping the floor. It was Julian. He was still there, long after everyone else had left. Elias watched his brother. Julian was moving slowly, rhythmically. Push, pull, push, pull. A thought struck Elias. Sterling, Elias said slowly. Where did grandfather get his springs? Before global supply chains? He didn't buy them, Sterling said. He made them. But the formula for the alloy was lost in the fire of 85, along with the old foundry. Lost, Elias murmured. Or hidden. He remembered the coordinates in the watch. The one that pointed to the lot where his mother used to live. The last will that Sterling had mentioned in the Act 1 outline. The one hidden at the woodshop. He hadn't gone there yet. He had been too busy fighting fires here. The coordinates, Elias said. 4:05 p.m., the location. I thought you checked it, Sterling asked. I didn't have time, Elias admitted. I thought it was just sentimental, a grave, a memorial. Arthur Thorne was not a sentimental man, Sterling reminded him. Elias grabbed his coat. We're going for a drive, Elias said. To where? To the roots, Elias said. If Lydia cuts off our branches, we have to go underground. He walked out of the office. He passed Julian on the way to the door. You missed a spot, Elias said, pointing to a pile of dust. Julian looked up. His face was smudged with dirt. He looked exhausted. But for the first time, his eyes weren't glazed over. They were focused. I'll get it, Julian said. Good, Elias said. When you're done, go home. I mean, go to the shelter or wherever you're staying. I'm sleeping in the break room, Julian admitted quietly. Vance gave me a key. Elias paused. He looked at his brother. The arrogance was gone, scraped away by weeks of manual labor. There's a cot in my office, Elias said. It's better than the break room bench. Use it. Julian blinked. He looked like he might cry. Thanks. Elias nodded and walked out into the night. The drive took 2 hours. They left the city and headed into the deep countryside. The GPS led them up a winding mountain road surrounded by dense pine forests. The coordinates led to a rusted gate marked Private Property. Elias got out of the car. He used a bolt cutter from the trunk to snap the chain. They drove up a gravel path until the headlights illuminated a structure. It wasn't a grave. It wasn't a house. It was an old sawmill. It was massive, built of rough-hewn timber that had turned grey with age. It looked abandoned for decades. This? Sterling asked, looking skeptical. This is the legacy? Elias walked up to the massive sliding doors. They were locked with a heavy iron bar. He pushed. The wood groaned. The doors slid open, revealing a cavernous darkness. Elias clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dust motes dancing in the air. He swept the light across the room. Piles of wood, enormous logs of dark, dense timber stacked to the ceiling. Lumber? Sterling asked. He left you firewood? Elias walked closer. He touched one of the logs. He scraped the bark with his fingernail. Underneath, the wood was a deep, rich purple-black. Not firewood, Elias whispered. Ebony. Macassar ebony. And over there, that's rosewood and Brazilian mahogany. He looked around the massive warehouse. There were tons of it. Sterling, Elias said, his voice trembling slightly. Do you know how much this is worth? These species are protected now. You can't cut them anymore. This stock, it must have been sitting here for 40 years. A fortune? Sterling asked. A king's ransom, Elias said. But that's not why he kept it. Elias walked past the wood stacks to the back of the mill. There was a smaller room, sealed off with glass. He opened the door. Inside, it was a time capsule, a fully equipped vintage metallurgy lab. There were crucibles, molds, and rolling mills, and on the workbench, under a layer of dust, lay a leather-bound notebook. Elias picked it up. He blew the dust off the cover. Alloy Compositions, Book 1, AT. Elias opened it. The pages were filled with Arthur's handwriting, formulas, tempering temperatures, and on the last page, a note. To Elias. The world will try to sell you parts. They will try to make you dependent. True independence means owning the source. This wood is for the cases. This lab is for the heart. Make your own springs. Make your own destiny. P.S. The acoustics of this valley are perfect. Listen to the wind. Elias looked up. He looked at the lab. They didn't need the Swiss. They didn't need Apex Corp. They had everything they needed right here to make the most exclusive, completely in-house watch in the world. Sterling, Elias said, a fierce grin breaking across his face. Call the trucks. We're moving the factory. Moving? Sterling sputtered. To where? Here, Elias said. We're going to build the Chronos in the woods, the way the old masters did. We're going to make made in isolation the ultimate luxury. This is madness, Sterling said. No, Elias said.
This is strategy.
Outside, the wind howled through the pines. It sounded like ticking. The winter in the Blackwood Valley was not polite. It was a siege. Snow piled up against the wooden walls of the old sawmill, insulating the structure in a blanket of white silence. Inside, however, the air was hot and loud. The transformation was miraculous. The cavernous space, once stacked with silent timber, now hummed with the rhythm of industry. But it wasn't the sterile, robotic hum of a modern factory. It was organic. It was the sound of human hands working metal and wood. Elias had moved 30 of the best machinists and watchmakers into the temporary barracks built on the property. They worked in shifts. They slept in bunk beds. They ate stew cooked in a communal pot. It felt less like a company and more like a resistance movement. In the center of the floor, the new foundry was roaring. Elias stood by the crucible, wearing a heavy leather apron and protective goggles. He was watching the molten alloy, the secret formula from Arthur's notebook, turn a vibrant, dangerous orange. Temperature? Elias shouted over the roar of the furnace. 2200 degrees, Vance yelled back, checking the sensor. Holding steady! Pour it! Vance pulled the lever. The liquid metal flowed into the molds for the hairsprings. This was the heart of the watch. If this alloy failed, the chronos would never tick. Watching from a distance, leaning on a broom, was Julian. Julian had changed. The soft, doughy look of a playboy had melted away, replaced by the lean, hungry look of a laborer. His expensive haircut had grown out into a messy mop. His hands were covered in cuts and burns. He wasn't just sweeping anymore. Elias had discovered that Julian, for all his faults, had perfect eyesight. He could spot a microscopic scratch on a polished case from 3 feet away. Julian was now in charge of quality control for the casing department. He walked over to the cooling rack where the first batch of wooden cases, carved from the vintage Macassar ebony, were sitting. He picked one up. It was beautiful. Dark, swirled with coffee-colored grain, polished to a glass-like sheen. It felt warm to the touch, unlike cold steel. "It's too light," Julian muttered. Elias approached him, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What?" "The case," Julian said, not looking up. "It's too light. A luxury watch needs heft. It needs to feel expensive before you even look at it. If we use pure wood, it feels like a toy." Elias took the case. Julian was right. It was exquisite, but it lacked the gravitational pull of gold or platinum. "We can't add metal to the outside," Elias said. "It ruins the aesthetic." "Core it," Julian said. He grabbed a piece of chalk and drew on the workbench. "Put a tungsten ring inside the wood. Invisible, but heavy. It adds 20 grams. It grounds it." Elias looked at the drawing. It was simple. It was smart. He looked at his brother. "Where did you learn about tungsten density?" Julian shrugged, looking embarrassed. "I used to sell my jewelry to pay for things. You learn what metals weigh. Gold is heavy. Tungsten is heavier. Fakes are light." Elias smiled. A genuine smile. He clapped a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder. "Good eye, Jules. Vance, retool the CNC. We're coring the cases. We need tungsten rings." Julian stood a little taller. For the first time in his life, he had contributed something other than a bar tab. 3 weeks later, the first prototype of the Forest Chronos was finished. It was a thing of terrifying beauty. The case was dark ebony, weighted perfectly with Julian's tungsten core. The face was open-worked, revealing the beating heart of the movement inside. The alloy spring that pulsed with the mesmerizing slow rhythm. It didn't look like a machine. It looked like a living organism trapped in wood and glass. The entire team gathered around the workbench. 30 tired, dirty people holding their breath. Elias wound the crown. Click, click, tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound was deep, resonant. The wood acted as a soundboard, amplifying the heartbeat. "It sings," Mrs. Gable, the old landlady who had followed Elias to cook for the crew, whispered. "We did it," Vance grunted, cracking his knuckles. "We actually did it." Elias looked at the watch. He felt a surge of pride that almost brought him to his knees. "Pack it," Elias said. "We send this one to the Geneva Watch Fair. We don't need a booth, we just need one reviewer to see it." Suddenly, the heavy sliding doors of the mill rumbled open. A blast of cold wind and snow swirled into the warm factory. The workers turned. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the blinding white snow, were 3 figures. One was Lydia. She was wearing a new fur coat, white as the snow, looking like an ice queen. Next to her was a man Elias didn't know. He was tall, thin and wore a suit that probably cost more than the entire sawmill. He had a face like a shark, blank eyes and a smile that showed too many teeth. Behind them was a lawyer, not Sterling, a young, hungry-looking shark in a cheap suit. "Close the door!" Vance shouted. "You're letting the heat out." Lydia stepped inside. She looked around the factory with a mixture of disgust and amusement. "Quaint," she said. Her voice cut through the noise of the machines. "Very rustic. Is this a sweatshop or a beaver dam?" Elias stepped forward, placing himself between the intruders and his crew. "You're trespassing, Lydia," Elias said. "This is private property." "Actually," the shark-faced man said, stepping forward, "it's collateral." He extended a hand. "Silas Vane, CEO of Apex Corp. I've heard so much about the little watchmaker." Elias didn't shake the hand. "What do you want?" "We own your debt, Elias," Vane said smoothly. He walked around a lathe, running a gloved finger over the metal. "The bank was getting nervous about your little experiment in the woods. They sold the note to us this morning. Thorne & Co. owes Apex Corp $40 million. Payable immediately." The factory went silent. The workers looked at Elias. "We have a grace period," Elias said, his heart hammering. 6 months. The deal with the bank was 6 months. "The deal with the bank was 6 months," the young lawyer chirped. "But the contract has a clause. Upon transfer of debt, the new creditor may demand immediate repayment if they deem the assets are being depreciated. We deem this," he gestured to the sawdust, "depreciation." "It's a hostile takeover," Sterling's voice came from the back. The old lawyer emerged from the office, looking pale. "They want to force a default so they can seize the patents." Vane smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "Smart man," Vane said. "Here is the offer, Elias. You hand over the blueprints for the Chronos, the rights to the Thorne name, and this lumberyard. In exchange, we forgive the debt. We give you a nice severance package. You can go back to fixing radios in a basement. No debt, no stress." "And the workers?" Elias asked. "Redundant," Vane said. "We have factories in Shenzhen. We don't need artisans." "Get out," Elias said. Vane raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I said, get out," Elias repeated, stepping closer. "We are not selling. We are not defaulting. We will pay you." "With what?" Lydia laughed. "Pine cones?" "We have inventory," Elias said. "The first batch is ready." "You have a week," Vane said, his smile vanishing. "1 week to come up with $40 million. If not, the bulldozers come. I plan to turn this valley into a ski resort. The wood will make excellent firewood for the lodge." Vane turned to leave. Lydia lingered. Her eyes scanned the room. They landed on Julian. Julian was standing by the cooling rack, holding a wrench. He looked dirty. He looked tired. Lydia walked over to him. She didn't mind the sawdust on her boots. "Look at you," she whispered, reaching out to touch his grease-stained cheek. "My poor, beautiful boy, playing peasant." Julian pulled his face away. "I'm working, Mother." "This isn't work, Julian. This is slavery," she hissed. "Look at Elias. He is drowning. He is going to drag you down with him. Do you really want to be here when the sheriff comes to evict you? Do you want to go to jail for his debts?" Julian didn't answer. He gripped the wrench tighter. "Come home, Julian," Lydia whispered. She pressed a card into his hand. "Silas likes you. He needs a VP of marketing for the new Thorne division at Apex. A face for the brand. A handsome face. Penthouse, cars. The life you were born for. She leaned in close to his ear. All you have to do is bring us the notebook. Julian froze. The notebook? He whispered. The alloy formula, Lydia murmured. Elias keeps it in the lab safe. You have access, don't you? Bring it to me, tonight, and we leave this nightmare behind. She kissed him on the cheek, a cold, dry kiss. Think about it. Don't go down with the ship, darling. Lydia turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the concrete. She joined Vane at the door. Tick-tock, Elias, Vane called out. 1 week. The heavy doors slammed shut. The factory was silent again. But the energy had changed. The hope was sucked out of the room. 40 million? Vance whispered. We can't make 40 million in a week. We can't even make 40,000. Elias turned to the crew. Get back to work, he said. His voice was hard. We are not finished. He walked straight to his office and slammed the door. That night, the wind howled louder than ever. The factory was dark, save for the safety lights. The workers were asleep in the barracks. Inside the mill, a single shadow moved. It was Julian. He walked silently across the factory floor. He wasn't wearing his work boots. He was in his socks to dampen the sound. He approached the glass-walled lab in the back. He stopped at the door. He looked through the glass. The safe was there. It was an old iron safe, heavy and brutal. But Julian knew the combination. He had seen Elias open it a dozen times. 19, 20, 85. The year the company was founded, and the year of the fire. Julian put his hand on the door handle. He felt the card Lydia had given him in his pocket. It felt hot against his leg. Penthouse. Cars. No more grease. No more sawdust. All he had to do was take the book. It was just a book. Elias had memorized it anyway, hadn't he? It wouldn't hurt Elias. It would just save Julian. He pushed the door open. It creaked. He walked to the safe. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, but from adrenaline. He spun the dial. 19, 20, 85. Clunk. The handle released. Julian pulled the heavy door open. There it was. The leather-bound notebook. The legacy of Arthur Thorne. The secret that made the Chronos possible. Julian reached in. His fingers brushed the leather. It weighs about 2 pounds, a voice said from the darkness. Julian jumped, spinning around. He dropped the flashlight. Elias was sitting in the corner of the lab in the dark. He was sitting on a stool, holding a mug of coffee. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. Elias, Julian gasped. I was just checking the lock. Lydia offered you a way out, didn't she? Elias asked calmly. Julian fell silent. He looked at the floor. She offered me a life, a real life. Not this camping trip from hell. Is that what this is to you? Elias asked. Hell? Look at my hands, Elias, Julian shouted, holding up his scarred palms. I'm bleeding. I'm tired. I hate the smell of oil. I'm not you. I don't get a hard-on for gears. I know, Elias said. You're not me. You're better at some things than I am. Elias stood up and walked into the pale light coming from the safe. You saw the tungsten core, Elias said. You saw what was missing. I built a machine. You built a product. I would have failed without you. Julian blinked. "You're just saying that." "I'm not," Elias said. Arthur was a genius engineer, but he was a terrible businessman. That's why the company was failing even before he died. He needed a partner. He needed someone who understood value, not just mechanics. Elias reached into the safe. He didn't take the notebook. He took out the prototype watch, the Forest Chronos. He held it out to Julian. "Take it," Elias said. Julian stared at him. "What?" "Take the watch and the notebook," Elias said. Julian's mouth dropped open. You're letting me steal it?" "If you take it to Lydia, she wins," Elias said. "Apex gets the patent. You get your penthouse. And this factory closes tomorrow." Elias stepped closer. "But if you take the watch, and you get in your car, and you drive to the city..." "To do what?" Julian asked. "To sell it," Elias said. "Not to Apex, to a collector. You know the collectors, Julian. You partied with them. You know the guys who spend $1 million on a piece of art just to brag about it." Elias placed the watch in Julian's hand. "I can build them. I can fix them. But I can't sell them. I don't know how to talk to those people. I don't know how to make them want it." Elias looked deep into his brother's eyes. "You are the salesman, Julian. You are the face. So here is the choice." Elias pointed to the door. "Go left, hike to the road, meet Lydia, and give her the book. Be a pet." He pointed to the garage. "Go right, take the truck, drive to the city with the prototype. Sell it. Pre-sell the whole batch. Save the company." Elias turned his back on Julian. He walked back to his stool and sat down. He picked up his coffee. "Choose." Julian stood there. The watch was heavy in his hand. The notebook was still in the safe. The silence stretched for a minute. 2 minutes. Then the sound of footsteps. Elias didn't turn around. He stared into his coffee cup, waiting for the sound of the door closing. Ideally, the footsteps would fade towards the garage. But the footsteps stopped. "I need gas money," Julian said. Elias turned around. Julian had closed the safe. He had the watch in his hand. He was grinning, a terrified, reckless grin. "The truck has a full tank," Elias said. "But here." He threw his wallet to Julian. "Don't come back without a check," Elias said. "I won't," Julian said. "I'm going to sell this thing for more money than Lydia has ever seen." Julian turned and ran out of the lab. A minute later, Elias heard the roar of the old pickup truck engine. Then the crunch of tires on gravel, fading into the night. Elias let out a long, shaky breath. He looked at the empty safe. He had just gambled the entire legacy on the brother who had spent his life losing money. "Don't make me regret this, Jules," Elias whispered. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the tracks of the truck as it headed toward the wolves. 3 days. 72 hours. That is exactly 259,200 seconds. Elias counted every single one of them. He sat in his glass office, staring at the driveway. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the valley buried in a suffocating white silence. The tire tracks from Julian's truck had long since been filled in. There was no phone call, no text message, no check. The factory floor, usually a symphony of productivity, had grown tense. The rhythm was off. The workers were whispering. They looked at Elias, then at the empty road, then back at their machines. They knew. "He's not coming back, is he?" Elias looked up. Vance was standing in the doorway of the office. The big foreman held a mug of coffee that looked like a thimble in his massive hand. "He's coming," Elias said. His voice sounded thin, like stretched wire. Selling a high-value item takes time. Escrow, authentication. It's not a pawn shop transaction. It's been 3 days, boss, Vance said gently. The kid took the only prototype. He took the truck. He took your wallet.
Vance took a sip of coffee.
My cousin saw him, Vance added quietly.
Elias froze.
Saw who?
Julian, in the city, 2 nights ago. Elias stood up slowly.
And?
He was at the Velvet Lounge, Vance said. High-stakes tables, champagne, laughing with some suits. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. The Velvet Lounge was Julian's old haunt. It was a place where fortunes were spent, not made. Maybe he was meeting a buyer, Elias said. But he didn't believe it. He could feel the doubt, cold and slithering, wrapping around his heart. Maybe, Vance said. He didn't sound convinced. Look, Elias, we trust you. But the crew, they're getting scared. If Vane comes back and we don't have the money, I will handle Vane, Elias said. With what? Vance asked. A wrench? Before Elias could answer, the sound of engines cut through the morning air. Not the rattle of an old pickup truck,
the deep, throaty rumble of SUVs. Elias looked out the window. A convoy of black vehicles was tearing up the snowy driveway. They didn't stop at the gate. The lead car simply rammed the chain, snapping it like thread. Alert the crew, Elias ordered, grabbing his coat. Shut down the machines, now. By the time Elias stepped out into the courtyard, 4 black SUVs had formed a semicircle around the sawmill entrance. 12 men stepped out. They weren't lawyers. They were private security contractors. Men with thick necks, tactical vests, and batons hanging from their belts. And in the center, stepping out of a heated Mercedes, was Silas Wayne. He looked fresh, rested, and utterly victorious. Good morning, Elias, Wayne called out, his breath pluming in the cold air. I hope you packed. Eviction day came early. You said 1 week, Elias said, stepping forward. Vance and a dozen workers stood behind him, holding wrenches and hammers. The tension was explosive. I said 1 week to pay, Van corrected. But circumstances have changed. We no longer need to wait for payment. We have acquired the asset. Van reached into his coat and pulled out a document. He waved it in the air. What is that? Elias asked. A bill of sale, Van smiled. Signed yesterday evening by your vice president and co-owner, Julian Thorne. Elias felt the world tilt. His knees went weak. You're lying, Elias whispered. Am I? Van signaled to one of his men. The guard opened the back door of the SUV. He pulled out a black bag. He unzipped it. Inside was the Forest Kronos, the prototype. Van picked it up. He held it by the strap, letting it dangle like a dead bird. Beautiful work, Elias, Van said. Really, top tier. Julian was very eager to show it to us. We met him at the Velvet Lounge. He was quite desperate to close the deal. He sold us the prototype and his 50% voting rights in Thorne and Company for a very reasonable $2 million. Instant cash. Van laughed softly. He took the money and booked a flight to Bali. One way. He didn't even ask about you. Elias stared at the watch, the tungsten cord ebony case he had designed, the movement he had poured his soul into. Julian had sold it. He hadn't just failed, he had cashed out. He had taken the quick $2 million and ran, leaving Elias and 30 workers to be crushed. I told you, Van said, walking closer. He is a thorn. They are parasites. You were a fool to trust him. Elias felt a roar in his ears.
It wasn't anger, it was a shattering. The tiny, fragile hope he had built, the idea that family could be repaired, that broken things could be fixed, it shattered into dust.
So, Wayne clapped his hands. Since we now own 50% of the company and hold the debt for the other 50%, we are exercising our right to liquidate. Immediately. He pointed to the mill. Boys, Wayne said to his security team, clear the building. Secure the lab. I want that notebook. No! Vance shouted. The foreman lunged forward. Stop! Elias yelled. But it was too late. One of the security guards swung a baton. It cracked against Vance's knee. The big man went down with a roar of pain. That was the spark. The courtyard erupted into chaos. The workers, fueled by weeks of exhaustion and rage, charged the security team. It was a brawl. Hammers met riot shields, fists met helmets. Clear them out! Wayne screamed, retreating behind his car. Use the gas! One of the guards pulled a canister from his vest and pulled the pin. He threw it towards the open doors of the sawmill. It was supposed to be tear gas. But in the chaos, he threw a flashbang grenade. And he threw it into the wrong pile. The canister arced through the air and landed in the corner of the mill, right next to the stack of 50-year-old bone-dry sawdust that had accumulated under the main saw. Boom! The explosion was small, but the heat was intense. The flash ignited the sawdust instantly. Whoosh! A pillar of fire shot up the wall. It caught the old dried timber of the structure. It caught the stack of rosewood. Fire! Someone screamed. The fighting stopped. Everyone froze. The sawmill, the repository of the world's rarest wood, the sanctuary of the Thorne legacy, was burning. The lab! Elias gasped. The fire was spreading fast, racing across the floor toward the glass-walled office in the back. The lab contained the molds. It contained the journal. If the journal burned, the formula for the alloy was gone. The chronos would be impossible to reproduce. Let it burn! Wayne shouted to his men. Pull back! Let it burn! Wayne didn't care about the wood. He wanted the insurance money. He wanted the land. A fire was convenient. Elias didn't think. He didn't calculate. He ran. Elias, no! Vance shouted from the ground. Elias sprinted into the burning building. The heat hit him like a physical wall. The smoke was thick, black, and acrid. It tasted of burning varnish and money. He pulled his coat up over his nose and ran toward the back. The flames were licking at the ceiling now. Burning beams were groaning, ready to fall. Elias reached the lab. The glass wall was already cracking from the heat. He kicked the door open. The room was filling with smoke. He scrambled to the safe. It was open. Julian had left it unlocked. Elias grabbed the leather-bound notebook. He shoved it inside his shirt. He looked at the molds. The heavy ceramic molds for the hairsprings. He couldn't carry them all. He grabbed the master mold, the one for the escapement. It was heavy, hot to the touch. Crack! A massive wooden beam crashed down in front of the door, blocking his exit. A curtain of fire roared up, sealing him in. Elias coughed, his lungs burning. He was trapped. He looked around. There was no other door. Only the high window, too small to crawl through. Help! He tried to shout, but the smoke choked him. He fell to his knees. He clutched the notebook against his chest. Is this it? He thought. To die in the ashes of the past? He thought of Julian, drinking champagne in Bali, laughing. I fixed the watch, Elias thought, his vision blurring. But I couldn't fix the family. The heat became unbearable. The darkness closed in. Then A sound. A roar. Not a fire. An engine. Smash! The wall of the sawmill exploded inward. The grill of the old pickup truck, Elias's truck, smashed through the burning timber, shattering the wood like matchsticks. The truck ran through the wall of fire, debris bouncing off its hood. It skidded to a halt in the middle of the lab, right next to Elias. The driver's door flew open. A figure jumped out. He was coughing, his eyes streaming tears, a wet rag tied around his face. "Get in!" the figure screamed. Elias looked up. It was Julian. He wasn't in Bali. He was here, in the fire. Julian grabbed Elias by the collar and dragged him. Elias was heavy, half unconscious. Julian, the boy who complained about lifting a suitcase, hauled his brother with manic strength. He shoved Elias into the passenger seat. A burning rafter crashed onto the bed of the truck. Julian jumped into the driver's seat. He threw the truck into reverse. "Hold on!" Julian yelled. He slammed the gas. The tire spun, screeching on the hot concrete, then caught traction. The truck shot backward, smashing back through the hole in the wall, flying out of the inferno and into the snow. Julian spun the wheel, drifting the truck sideways, away from the collapsing building. They came to a stop in the middle of the courtyard. Behind them, the roof of the sawmill collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a mushroom cloud of sparks into the winter sky. Elias coughed violently, hacking up black soot. He looked at the burning ruin, the wood, the inventory, millions of dollars of ebony and mahogany, gone. He looked at Julian. Julian was slumped over the steering wheel, gasping for air. His face was black with soot. His eyebrows were singed. "You," Elias rasped. "You sold it." Vane said, "You sold it." Julian turned his head. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't a plane ticket. It was a cashier's check. He slammed it onto the dashboard. $40 million, Julian wheezed. Elias stared at the check. It was drawn from the account of the Royal Museum of Horology, Geneva. "I didn't sell it to Vane," Julian coughed, spitting out saliva and ash. "I sold it to the museum. They bought it as a piece of modern history. The watch that saved a legacy." "But Vane..." Elias looked at the SUVs. Vane was standing there, his mouth open. The prototype he was holding, the one he claimed Julian sold him, was dangling from his hand. Julian followed Elias's gaze. He laughed, a cracked, hysterical laugh. "That?" Julian pointed to the watch in Vane's hand. "That's the decoy. I made it. I took a rejected case, filled it with lead, and put a sticker of a movement on the dial. Vane's goons stole it from my hotel room while I was at the bank." Julian looked at Vane and shouted, his voice breaking. "It's a fake, you idiot! Just like you!" Vane looked at the watch. He turned it over. The back fell off, revealing a hollow cavity filled with fishing weights. Vane's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Arrest them!" Vane shrieked to his remaining guards. "Arrest them for arson! They burned their own building!" Actually, a new voice boomed. Sterling walked into the chaos. He was holding up his phone. "I have been live streaming this entire event to the state police cloud server," Sterling said calmly, "including the part where your employee threw an incendiary device into a lumber mill. That is a Class A felony. Arson. Attempted murder." Sirens began to wail in the distance. Real police sirens. Dozens of them. Vane looked at the burning mill. He looked at Sterling. He looked at the check on the dashboard. He dropped the fake watch in the snow. He got into his car without a word. "Go," he told his driver. The SUVs peeled away, retreating in disgrace. Elias sat in the truck. The heat of the fire was still radiating against the glass. He looked at the burning mill. The wood was gone. The raw material for the cases, the Macassar ebony, was turning into ash. "The wood," Elias whispered. "It's gone. We have the money, but we have no wood." Julian wiped his face. He looked at the fire. "We have the notebook?" Julian asked. Elias patted his chest. He pulled out the leather book. It was warm, singed at the edges, but intact. "Yes." "And the molds?" "The master mold," Elias said. "I have it." "Then we have the heart," Julian said. "We can find more wood, or we use steel or stone. It doesn't matter." Julian looked at Elias. His eyes were clear, fierce. "We are the Thorne brothers. We don't need dead trees to make time." Elias looked at his brother. Really looked at him. The boy was gone. The man sitting next to him had driven into a fire. Elias began to laugh. It was a painful, wheezing laugh, but it was real. "You sold a hollow watch to a shark," Elias said. "I learned from the best," Julian grinned, his teeth white against his soot-stained face. "Decoy gears. Distraction." The workers were gathering around the truck, cheering. Vance was limping over, supported by two men. The mill was gone. The Plan B inventory was ash. But as Elias looked at the check, and then at his brother, and then at the loyal crew, he knew the second act was over. They had lost the past, but they had bought the future. The fire was out, but the world still smelled like wet charcoal and lost history. The Blackwood Valley, once a sanctuary of pine-scented air, was now a scar in the landscape. The skeletal remains of the sawmill stood black and jagged against the grey sky, like the ribs of a leviathan that had been picked clean. Elias sat on the tailgate of the scorched pickup truck. He was wrapped in a thermal blanket provided by the paramedics. He held a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Across the clearing, the police were finishing their work. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. Silas Wayne and his private army were gone, escorted off the property by state troopers. The video evidence Sterling had captured was damning. Wayne would be tied up in litigation for years. The threat of the hostile takeover had evaporated like the smoke. But Elias didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. The acoustics, the weight, the soul, it was all tied to that material. Now it's just dust. "We can buy wood," Julian suggested. "There are importers." "Not like that," Elias shook his head. "That timber was seasoned for 50 years. It was dense as stone. You can't buy time, Julian. That's the one thing you can't buy." Elias stood up. The blanket fell from his shoulders. "We're a watch company with no watches," he said. "We have a movement that beats, but no chest to put it in." He walked away from the truck towards the ruins. "Elias, wait," Julian called out. "It's not safe. The structure is unstable." Elias ignored him. He stepped over the yellow tape. He needed to see it close up. He needed to apologize to the legacy he had failed to protect. His boots crunched on the debris. It was a landscape of devastation. Twisted metal roofing lay tangled with charred beams. The heat had been so intense that parts of the concrete floor had cracked. He reached the spot where the inventory stacks had been. It was just a mound of black charcoal now. Elias knelt down. He reached out with his gloved hand and picked up a chunk of wood. It was a piece of the Macassar ebony. It was black, not the deep purple black of its natural state, but the flat, dead black of charcoal. The surface was cracked and scaled, like the skin of a reptile. He squeezed it, expecting it to crumble into dust. It didn't crumble. Elias frowned. He squeezed harder. The wood was rock solid. He took off his glove. He touched the burnt wood with his bare skin. It felt cold, rough, and incredibly hard. Sho sugi ban, he whispered. It was an ancient Japanese technique. You burn cedar wood to preserve it. The char creates a layer of carbon that protects the wood from rot, insects, and fire. It makes the wood eternal. But this wasn't cedar. This was iron-dense ebony. The fire hadn't destroyed it. The fire had tempered it. Elias pulled a pocket knife from his belt. He scraped at the charred surface. The black soot flaked away, revealing a layer underneath. It wasn't brown wood. It was a crystallized, shimmering charcoal texture. The heat had polymerized the oils inside the dense timber, fusing the fibers into something that wasn't quite wood and wasn't quite stone. It was something new. Elias tapped the wood with the handle of his knife. Ting! It rang. It didn't thud. It rang with a high, clear ceramic tone. The acoustics, Elias breathed. They changed. He looked around the pile. There were tons of this. Massive logs, charred on the outside, baked to perfection on the inside. He wasn't looking at a graveyard. He was looking at a mine. "Julian!" Elias shouted. He turned around, waving the black chunk of wood. "Julian, bring the saw! The diamond saw!" Julian jumped off the truck and ran over, looking panicked. "What? What is it?" "Cut this," Elias ordered, shoving the burnt log into Julian's hands. "Cut it right down the middle." Julian looked at the black lump. "Elias, it's firewood." "Just cut it." Vance brought the portable diamond cutter, the one they used for sapphire glass. He set it up on a stable piece of concrete. The saw whirred to life. Julian held the wood. He pushed it into the spinning blade. Zzzt! The sound was high-pitched, like cutting granite. Sparks flew, not sawdust, but sparks. The log fell open. The three men stared at the cross-section. It was breathtaking. The core was still the deep, rich ebony, untouched by the flames, but surrounding it was a thick halo of jet-black carbonized wood, merging seamlessly into the center. The heat had created a natural gradient, a sunburst of brown fading into absolute void-like black. And the smell. It didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like incense, like ancient temples. "It didn't burn," Vance whispered. "It cooked." "It evolved," Elias corrected. He ran his thumb over the cut surface. It was smooth as glass. "This material, it's harder than the original. It's lighter because the moisture is gone. And the look? No two pieces will ever be the same." Elias looked up at Julian. His eyes were burning with a new fire. "We don't need to buy wood," Elias said. "We have it. We're not making the forest kronos anymore." "What are we making?" Julian asked. "The phoenix," Elias said. "Born from fire. Every watch case is carved from the ruins of the legacy. Scars are not defects, they are proof of survival." Julian looked at the wood. A slow smile spread across his face. The marketer in him was waking up. "The narrative," Julian whispered. "My God, the narrative. The watch that survived the fire. Where the resilience. Collectors will go insane for this. It's not just luxury, it's mythology. Elias stood up. He looked at the ruined mill, but he didn't see a tragedy anymore. He saw a kiln. Vance, Elias barked. Get the crew. We're not cleaning this up. We're harvesting it. Every log, every scrap. This is our gold. The next few months were a blur of reconstruction. They didn't move back to the city. They rebuilt the mill. But this time, they built it with glass and steel, rising directly out of the stone foundation of the old structure. They left the scorched beams of the original frame exposed in the lobby, a monument to the night that almost ended them. Elias worked 18-hour days. He had to recalibrate the CNC machines to handle the new charred ebony. It was abrasive, tough on the tools. It fought back. But the result was worth it. The Phoenix Chronos was unlike anything the watch world had ever seen. The case was a jagged, organic mix of raw, charred texture and high-polish ebony. The movement inside, the alloy hairspring, ticked with a precision that rivaled the atomic clock. It was savage and elegant all at once. But while the factory was being reborn, something else was being repaired. One rainy evening, Elias sat in his new office overlooking the valley. The production line below was quiet. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Elias said. Julian walked in. He was wearing a suit again, a sharp, tailored navy suit. But he wasn't wearing it like a costume anymore. He wore it like armor. He held a tablet. "Pre-orders," Julian said, placing the tablet on the desk. "We are sold out for the next 3 years. The wait list is 5,000 names long. The Sultan of Brunei just ordered 10. Elias didn't look at the numbers. He looked at his brother. "You're good at this," Elias said. "I know," Julian smirked, but it was a softer smirk. "I told you, I can sell ice to an Eskimo, or burnt wood to a billionaire." Julian walked over to the window. He looked out at the rain. "You know," Julian said, his voice dropping, "I hated you growing up." Elias leaned back in his chair. "I know, you made it very clear." "I didn't hate you because you were weird," Julian continued. "I hated you because Father watched you." Elias frowned. "He ignored me. He criticized me." "No," Julian shook his head. "He challenged you. He gave you impossible puzzles. He gave you broken things. He never gave me anything broken. He just gave me money." Julian turned to face Elias. "He knew you could handle the broken things," Julian said. "He looked at me and saw someone weak, someone who needed to be padded with cash so he wouldn't break." Elias was silent. He had never thought of it that way. He had always seen the money as love and the broken watch as disdain. "I wanted to be tested," Julian whispered. "I wanted him to give me a broken watch, but he never did." Elias opened his desk drawer. He pulled out a small velvet box. "He didn't give you a broken watch," Elias said. "But I can." He slid the box across the desk. Julian looked at it. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was not a watch. It was a movement, just the raw mechanism of the Chronos. But it was disassembled. The gears were scattered. The springs were uncoiled. It was a mess of tiny parts. "This is the movement for your personal watch," Elias said. "Serial number 002. Number 001 is in the museum." Julian looked at the pile of parts. "I can't put this together," Julian said. "I don't have the hands." "You have the eyes," Elias said. "And you have the patience now. I saw you scraping that soot for 12 hours straight last week." Elias stood up and walked around the desk. "I'll teach you," Elias said. "Every Sunday, we sit down, We build it. Together. It might take a year, but when it ticks, it will be yours. Julian looked at the scattered gears. He looked at his brother. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. He blinked them away quickly. Sunday, Julian said. Okay, but if I break a spring, you're paying for it. Deal, Elias smiled. The healing was not just between the brothers. It was legal too. Sterling arrived the next morning with a thick file. He looked pleased. The final audit of the Thorne estate is complete, Sterling announced, sitting down in the conference room. With the valuation of the new company, the debts are cleared. However, there is one outstanding matter. Lydia, Elias said. Precisely, Sterling nodded. She is destitute. Wayne fired her the moment the deal collapsed. She has been evicted from her apartment. She is currently staying in a motel on the highway. Julian looked down at the table. He didn't say anything. She is suing, Sterling said, or trying to. She claims the Plan B trust was mishandled. It's a frivolous suit, but it will be annoying. It will generate bad press just as we launch the Phoenix. What does she want? Elias asked. Money, Sterling said. She wants a settlement, $5 million, to go away. Julian looked up. Don't give it to her. She'll just waste it. I wasn't planning to, Elias said. Elias stood up. He walked to the whiteboard where the production schedule was drawn. We need a packaging manager, Elias said. Sterling blinked. Excuse me? The boxes, Elias said. The Phoenix comes in a custom burnt wood box. It needs to be lined with velvet. It needs to be perfect. It's a detail-oriented job. It requires someone who knows luxury, someone who knows what expensive feels like. Julian stared at Elias. You can't be serious. She knows luxury, Elias said. She knows texture. She knows presentation. It's the only thing she's actually good at. She tried to destroy us, Elias, Julian argued. She called us trash. And now she is trash, Elias said calmly. We can leave her there. That is what Wayne would do. That is what she would do to us. Elias turned to look at his brother. But we are not them. We are Thornes. We build things. We don't throw people away. He looked at Sterling. Draft a contract. Position, head of packaging and presentation. Salary, standard managerial rate. No equity, no bonuses. And she has to work on site. She will be humiliated, Sterling warned. Yes, Elias said. She will be. And then she will have a choice. Just like Julian did. She can swallow her pride and work, or she can starve in her pride. It's a test, Julian realized. It's always a test, Elias said. 2 days later, a taxi pulled up to the glass and steel factory. Lydia Thorne stepped out. She looked older. Her clothes were the same designer labels, but they were wrinkled. Her hair was pulled back tight. She looked tired. She stood at the entrance, looking up at the sign. Thorne Watchworks. Elias and Julian stood on the balcony above the lobby. Lydia saw them. She stopped. She clutched her handbag tight. For a moment it looked like she would turn around. Her chin went up. The old defiance flared in her eyes. But then she looked at the taxi as it drove away. She looked at the cold mountains. She looked at her empty future. Her shoulders slumped. She walked to the front door. She pushed it open. Inside, the receptionist, Mrs. Gable, the old landlady, who now ran the front desk with an iron fist, handed her a badge. You're late, Mrs. Gable croaked. Packaging is in the east wing. Don't touch the merchandise with bare hands. Lydia looked at the badge. It didn't say owner. It didn't say VP. It said Lydia Thorne, staff. She took a deep breath.
She pinned it to her Chanel jacket. "Thank you," she whispered. High above, Julian let out a breath.
"I didn't think she'd do it," he said. "People survive," Elias said. "It's the strongest instinct there is." Elias checked his watch, the original rusted pocket watch, now fully restored and ticking in his pocket. "Come on," Elias said. "It's 4:05 p.m. "So?" Julian asked. "So," Elias smiled, "it's time to work on your watch." They turned and walked back into the office. Below them, the factory hummed. The sound of diamond saws cutting charred wood, the sound of metal being forged, the sound of a family stitching itself back together. Tick, tock. The rhythm was perfect. The launch gala for the Phoenix Chronos was not held in a hotel ballroom. It was held on the factory floor. The machines were silenced, polished to a shine. The concrete floors were scrubbed. Between the lathes and the CNC mills, pedestals of black steel rose up, each holding a single watch. The lighting was dramatic. Spotlights cutting through the industrial bloom, illuminating the charred, jagged texture of the watch cases. It was raw, it was real, and the elite of the watch world were losing their minds over it. Elias stood on the mezzanine, adjusting his tie. He hated ties. He felt like he was wearing a noose. Below him, 300 people milled about, sipping champagne. There were collectors from Tokyo, investors from New York, and journalists from every major luxury magazine. They were touching the rough walls of the rebuilt factory, marveling at the authenticity of the soot stains. "Stop fidgeting," a voice said. Elias turned. It was Julian. Julian looked perfect. He was in his element, shaking hands, laughing, guiding people toward the displays. He had just run up the stairs to check on his brother. "I feel like a fraud," Elias admitted. "These people, they don't care about the escapement mechanism. They care about the story. They care that it burned." "That's the game, Elias," Julian said, straightening Elias's collar. "You built the engine, I built the car. Now let them drive it." Julian looked down at the crowd. "Besides," Julian added softly, "look who's guarding the main display." Elias looked down. At the center of the room, guarding the glass case that held Phoenix number 001, stood a woman in a black staff uniform. She was directing guests, ensuring no one placed their drink on the glass, adjusting the velvet cloth with obsessive precision. It was Lydia. She wasn't hiding, she wasn't skulking, she was working. A famous collector, a man Lydia used to host at her dinner parties, approached the case. He recognized her. He paused, looking shocked. He said something to her. Elias held his breath. Would she snap? Would she crumble? Lydia simply smiled, a polite, professional staff smile, and pointed to the watch. She described the wood grain. She did her job. The collector nodded, impressed, and moved on. "She's doing it," Julian whispered. "She's actually doing it." "Work creates dignity," Elias said. "Even for her." "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling's voice boomed over the PA system. "Please welcome the CEO of Thorne Watchworks, Mr. Elias Thorne." The applause was polite, curious. Elias walked down the stairs. He stepped onto the small stage. The spotlight hit him. He blinked. He didn't have a speech prepared. Julian had written one for him, but Elias had left it on his desk. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the faces of his workers, Vance, Mrs. Gable, the machinists, standing in the back, wearing their best clothes. "My father," Elias began, his voice rough but clear, "left me a broken watch. He told me to fix it or throw it away." The room went silent. "For a long time, I thought he hated me," Elias continued. "I thought he gave me the trash while he gave the rest of the world his genius. But I was wrong. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old battered pocket watch, the one that started it all. He didn't give me trash. He gave me a lesson. He taught me that nothing is truly broken until you stop trying to fix it. He taught me that you can't buy a legacy. You have to build it. And sometimes, you have to burn it down to find out what it's really made of. Elias pointed to the Phoenix Chronos in the display case. This watch is made of the ashes of my father's factory. It is black because it walked through fire. It is strong because it survived. Just like this family. He looked at Julian. He looked at Lydia. We are Thorne, and we are still ticking. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It was the sound of a legend being solidified. Later that night, as the guests were leaving, Sterling found Elias sitting on a bench outside, smoking a rare cigarette. The moon was full, illuminating the snow on the mountains. A triumph, Sterling said, sitting down. We have pre-sold the entire inventory for the next 5 years. The stock price has tripled since this morning. That's good, Elias said. Julian will be happy. He likes high scores. There is one last thing, Sterling said. The lawyer placed a small, worn envelope on the bench between them. What is this? Elias asked. Another riddle? Another test? No, Sterling said. The truth. Elias picked up the envelope. It was old. The paper was yellowed. The handwriting on the front was delicate, feminine. To my son Elias. To be read when he finds his own time. Elias froze. This is my mother's handwriting. Arthur kept it, Sterling said softly. He kept it in his private vault, the one even Lydia didn't know about. He gave me instructions to give it to you only after you had fully established yourself. Not as a rich man, but as your own man. Elias opened the envelope. His hands shook more than they ever had while holding a tweezer. He pulled out a letter. My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, your father has kept his promise. I know you must hate him. I know he has been hard on you. I know he has treated you like a stranger in your own home. But you must understand. I asked him to. Elias stopped reading. The breath caught in his throat. I grew up with nothing, Elias. I lived in that sawmill valley. I learned that a man is defined by his hands, not his wallet. When I met Arthur, he was already rich. I saw what money did to people. I saw what it did to his friends. It made them soft. It made them cruel. When I fell ill, when I knew I wouldn't be there to protect you, I made Arthur swear an oath. I told him, don't let him become one of them. Don't let the money rot him. Teach him to work. Teach him to struggle, even if he hates you for it. Make him strong, Arthur. Make him a watchmaker, not an heir. He didn't want to do it. He loved you so much, Elias. He wanted to give you the world, but he loved me more. So he promised. He played the villain so you could become the hero. He broke your heart so the world couldn't break your spirit. The time 4:05 p.m. That was the time you were born. It was the happiest moment of his life. Forgive him, Elias. He was just a father trying to save his son. Love, Mom. Elias lowered the letter. Tears, hot and fast, streamed down his face. He didn't wipe them away. The cruelty, the coldness, the butcher's hands comments. It wasn't rejection. It was training. It was a desperate, agonizing performance by a father who wanted to honor his dying wife's wish. Arthur had sacrificed his relationship with his son to ensure his son's character survived. "He loved me," Elias whispered. The words felt strange, heavy. "More than you know," Sterling said. "He used to call me after every time he yelled at you. He would ask, 'Did I go too far, Sterling? Did I break him?' And I would say, 'No, Arthur. He is bending, but he is not breaking.'" Sterling looked at Elias. "He was so proud of you, Elias. Every time you fixed something in the basement, he knew. He watched." Elias looked up at the moon. A massive weight, a burden he had carried for 20 years, lifted off his chest. The anger evaporated. The resentment vanished. All that was left was a deep, aching gratitude. "He left me nothing," Elias said, a smile breaking through the tears. "So I could have everything." Elias stood up. He wiped his face. "Where is she?" Elias asked. "Lydia?" Sterling asked. "She's in the packaging bay, cleaning up." Elias walked back into the factory. The gala was over. The caterers were packing up. He walked to the east wing. Lydia was there. She was folding the velvet display cloths. She had taken off her shoes. Her feet must have been killing her. She looked up when Elias entered. She stiffened, putting her shoes back on quickly. "I was just finishing," she said defensively. "Everything is accounted for. No missing inventory." Elias walked up to her. He didn't see the evil stepmother anymore. He saw a woman who had also been a victim of Arthur's complex game. A woman who was given money but denied the truth. "You did a good job tonight," Elias said. Lydia blinked. She looked suspicious. "I did my job, that's all." "The collector, Mr. Tanaka," Elias said. "He told Julian that your presentation of the watch was the most compelling he heard all night. He bought 3. Lydia's posture straightened slightly. A flicker of pride appeared in her eyes. "Tanaka always did like a good story. I simply embellished the grain structure." "You sold it," Elias corrected. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small box. It wasn't a watch. It was a business card. He handed it to her. "Lydia Thorne, Director of Client Relations." Lydia stared at the card. "Director?" "Packaging is a waste of your talents," Elias said. "You know these people. You speak their language. You know who wants to be flattered and who wants to be challenged." "You want me to represent the company?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. "After everything?" "You are a thorn," Elias said, "like it or not, and we need to sell watches." He looked her in the eye. "The salary is better. You can move out of the motel." Lydia looked at the card. Her hand shook. She looked up at Elias, and for the first time in 20 years, the mask fell away. There was no sneer, no scheme, just a tired, grateful woman. "Arthur," she whispered. "Arthur would have never done this." "Arthur had his methods," Elias said softly. "I have mine." "Thank you," she said. It was barely a whisper, but it was the loudest thing she had ever said. "See you Monday, Lydia," Elias said. He turned and walked away. He walked out onto the factory floor. The lights were dimmed. The machines were silent. But in the silence, he could hear it. Tick, tock. It wasn't just the watches. It was the building itself. It was the people. It was the legacy, finally whole. He walked to the large window overlooking the valley. The snow had stopped. Act 3's almost done, he thought. Just one last thing to do. He touched the pocket watch over his heart. Spring returned to the Blackwood Valley. It was a slow, gentle greening. Ferns unfurled from the ash-covered soil. Wildflowers pushed through the cracks in the old concrete foundation.
The scars of the fire were still there, the blackened stones, the scorched earth, but life was growing over them. Inside the factory, the rhythm was steady. It was no longer the frantic, desperate pace of survival. It was the confident hum of mastery. In the quiet room, a soundproofed glass atelier suspended above the main floor. Julian sat at a workbench.
He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a white lab coat. He had a jeweler's loop screwed into his right eye. On the table before him sat the movement of Thorne number 002. It had taken him 14 months. 14 months of Sundays. 14 months of cursing, dropping tiny screws and starting over. Elias sat across from him, reading a newspaper. He didn't look up. He was just present. "I think," Julian whispered, his voice tight with concentration, "I think the bridge is seated." He picked up his screwdriver. He turned the final screw. A quarter turn. A breath. A final nudge. He put the screwdriver down. He picked up the winding stem. Elias lowered the newspaper. He watched. Julian's fingers, once shaky and soft, were now steady. He turned the crown. Click, click, click. He stopped. He leaned in. Silence. Julian's shoulders slumped. "It's not working. I missed something. The escapement is..." Tick. Julian froze. Tick. 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 The sound was faint, but it was there. A steady, rhythmic heartbeat. Julian let out a gasp. He looked at Elias, his eyes wide behind the magnifying glass. "It's alive," Julian whispered. "It is," Elias smiled. Julian looked down at the tiny machine. He looked at his hands. "I made this," Julian said. "I actually made this." "You didn't just make it," Elias said. "You earned it. Now you can wear it." Julian picked up the movement. He treated it with a reverence he had never shown a stack of cash. "I understand now," Julian said softly. Why he did it. Why he loved the ticking more than the money. The money disappears. This stays. "Welcome to the family, watchmaker," Elias said. Downstairs, the lobby was bustling. Lydia was on the phone. She was speaking French, charming a distributor from Paris. She laughed, a genuine throaty laugh. She saw Elias walking down the stairs and gave him a quick, sharp nod. A salute between generals. Elias walked out the front doors. He got into his old pickup truck. He hadn't bought a new car. He didn't need one. He drove out of the valley, past the spot where the new saplings were being planted to replace the ebony. He drove for an hour back toward the city, but he didn't enter the skyline. He turned off onto a quiet road lined with oak trees, the Hillside Memorial Park. He parked the truck. He walked up the grassy hill. It was a modest grave. Arthur hadn't wanted a mausoleum. He had a simple grey headstone. Arthur Reginald Thorne, 1955 to 2024. Master of Time. Elias stood in front of the stone. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree above. For a year, Elias had come here with anger, then with confusion. Today, he came with peace. He knelt down in the grass. He brushed a few dead leaves off the stone. "I finished it, Dad," Elias said softly. "The factory is running. The debt is paid. Lydia is working. Julian is building." He paused. "And I read Mom's letter." The wind seemed to pick up, swirling around him. "You were a stubborn old man," Elias smiled. tears stinging his eyes. You could have just told me. You didn't have to make me sleep in a basement. He touched the cold stone. But you were right. If you had given me the keys, I would have just driven the car. You made me build the engine instead. Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out the wooden box, the one Sterling had given him on the day of the funeral. He opened it. Inside lay the pocket watch, the patient zero. The watch that had started as a rusted wreck became a puzzle, became a key, and finally became a teacher. It was polished now. The silver shone. The glass was new. The hands were straight. It was ticking, strong and true. Elias looked at the watch. Then he looked at the grave. You told me to fix it or throw it away, Elias said. I fixed it. He placed the watch on top of the headstone. The silver case glinted in the sunlight. I don't need it anymore, Elias whispered. I have the time inside me now. He stood up. He left the watch there, ticking away the seconds for the man who had run out of them. A final gift. A completed circle. Elias turned and walked down the hill. He didn't look back. He didn't need to check the time. He knew exactly what time it was. It was time to go home.